Hello friends, welcome back to EduTap Himachal Pradesh Administrative Services channel. In this session, we are going to deal with the new topic, that is LPG reforms. So this entire topic is dealt in few parts, that is part 1 and part 2. So we'll understand in detail what we are going to look at in this particular topic in the upcoming slides. So LPG reforms, which are known as the landmark reforms in the year landmark reforms which were taken in the year 1991, have recently completed, that is in the July 2021 they completed 30 years. So this gives us an opportunity to look back upon those economic reforms that have taken place, and with the passage of the time our understanding of the events refines. So this opportunity, we take this opportunity to look back at the reforms that have helped India to overcome such a massive crisis that was looming over the Indian economy. So this gives us an opportunity, the lessons we can learn, the lessons that from the experience of 30 years, and they will serve as a guide, to tide over the present economic crisis, that is the pandemic crisis. They will serve as a guide to tide over the present economic crisis and give us an opportunity to uplift the economic condition of the Indian economy. So now this is a very ripe time that these are the reforms that have taken the Indian economy to greater heights. So now we'll be looking upon this topic in its entirety. So let me tell you the scheme of the things that we are going to discuss in this particular topic. First we'll look at the reforms. So what were the events that led to the BOP crisis of 1991, and what exactly unveiled, or how did things pan out during this particular crisis, and what was the response of the government to tide over the crisis. We'll understand the response in the next session, and along with that we'll also understand the effects the reforms have had on the economies in the past 30 years. So we will be understanding this entire topic holistically. That is, first of all we will understand what led to the crisis of BOP 1991 crisis, then what was the government's response, then what has been the effect of these reforms on the Indian economy in the past 30 years. So these reforms, quite famously known as LPG reforms, where L stands for liberalization measures, P stands for privatization measure, and G stands for the globalization measure. So we will be understanding all these reforms in the next slide, or in the next session, sorry. So in this particular session we will be understanding what exactly were the events that led us to the BOP crisis and how did the crisis pan out. So let us proceed ahead now. So before proceeding ahead with the BOP, which stands for balance of payment. So what exactly is this balance of payment? As you are already aware with the BOP term, let me just recall the few components of the BOP, which are current account. The balance of payment account comprises of current account and the capital account. So let me give you the picture that was playing out during the 1990s. So what was the event? See, we had literally no import of goods because Indian government had imposed a high tariff rate, that is high import duty, up to the rate of 200%, which were the highest in the world, and now they have been gradually reduced to 10%. The current peak rate of custom duties, import duties, 10%. In the 1997 it was reduced to 45%. So we can see that how the high import duty have been reduced from 200% to current rate of 10% in 2021. So this was the scenario. There was no import of goods and exports was very minimal, and import of goods only on crucial products, such as we needed the crude oil, because we do not have the access to crude oil within the country. So the imports for the essential commodities were always there, and whereas the consumer goods and the other goods were not allowed, whereas the exports was also minimal, and trade in services was not at all present during that time. The economic service industry had boomed in India only post those reforms, and transfer payments were minimal, like the remittances sent by the Indian residents back to the home country. And if you look at the capital account, the investments were literally none. That is, there was no FDI present, and the portfolio investment was not there. External borrowing were pretty high. that is 23% of India external debt was present. That is the Indian government borrowing from the foreign governments in the form of a loan. So external borrowings was there. Then apart from that, external assistance was minimal. So now if you look at this, we had a BOP crisis. So what exactly is a BOP crisis? The sum of the current account and the capital account should be greater, that is should be in surplus. If it is in negative value, then we will have a crisis. So what exactly? The surplus will be sent to, will be known as forex reserve, that is foreign exchange reserve. And we had, why do we need these reserves? See, if we are importing, then we need to pay back the other countries in the hard currency such as dollars or any other currency that demands. If we have literally less forex reserve, then we will not be able to pay them. During the 1991 BOP crisis, forex reserve were just 2500 crore, and it would hardly last for 3 weeks. So that was the scenario. It would only last for 3 weeks. Such was the crisis. That is, if we wanted to import any commodity from the foreign countries, then we had forex reserve which could only last for 3 weeks. So that was the crisis, and this is the entire BOP summation. Now we will be looking at the events that have led us to the crisis. So scenario that prompted the 1991 reform. Let us just go back to the history a bit, that is post independence. So if you can see here, the 1991 crisis was not a sudden blip. That is, it did not take place suddenly, but rather it was a culmination of multitude of factors ranging from global failure of socialism as an economic policy to inward looking domestic policy. So what exactly happened? See, India, which attained independence in 1947, was always fearful or threatful, was fearful of the fact that the foreign companies which come to trade in India will rather go on to colonize India in future. So this is what happened with the British East India Company. So Indian government with this ideology believed that we will not be allowing any foreign players within the economy to carry out any economic activities. So it had literally closed the doors. Indian government had closed the doors to foreign companies. So there was no globalization component in it. And apart from that, India adopted a policy of socialism. So what exactly is socialism? There were two policies that were prevailing in the world at that time and even today. One is the socialism is where the government controls all the major important economic resources and carries out the economic activity. In capitalism, the market forces are left to play itself. That is, the private players are allowed to engage in all the economic activities of their wish, then they will the economic activities will start happening. But Indian government adopted the policy of socialism, and in capitalism the government will only act as an anchor. That is, as the it will be acting as the role, it will be playing the role of facilitator, where it will only shape the policies. The rest of the activities will be taken by the private sector. But India, with its colonial history, thought of government is the right person or entity to think for the greater good of the country. So it adopted socialism. And as we saw, USSR, that is United Socialist of Soviet Russia, that is Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, which was majorly an amalgamation of the major countries in the Eastern Europe. Russia was the major front runner. That is, the Russia was the head of this country, this bloc. So it was disintegrated. Then many countries were formed out of this grouping: USSR, Russia, Ukraine, and many other countries, Latvia and all that. So this was disintegrated in 1991, and India had a major trading with this USSR bloc, and it was failed. That is, it had followed the policy of socialism and it was failed, and whereas the America had followed the policy of capitalism. So these were the major events that were that led us to the 1991 crisis. So let me just reiterate the fact that the 1991 crisis was not a sudden blip, rather it was a culmination of multitude of factors ranging from the global failure of socialism, which was, that is, we as seen in the example of USSR, and as an economic policy to inward looking domestic policy. We'll look at it in the next slide. And a consequent foreign exchange crisis in the country. We'll also understand this policy in the upcoming slides. See, the Indian economic policy after independence was influenced by the colonial experience, as I shared that we had a colonial history and had closed the door to foreign companies, and which was seen by the Indian leaders as exploitative in nature, and by those leaders exposure to Fabian socialism. That is, socialism is what I just told you, that the government will have a major control over the all the sectors in the economy, and with the Jawaharlal Nehru as our prime minister, we followed a new form of socialism, that is Fabian socialism, which also had a mixed component of private sector, which was very minimal back then. That is mixture of public and the private players playing coming together to play and or to build the economy, but the role of private sector was minimal, and this was the policy which was resorted by the Indian government. So how did things pan out? As a result, the economic policies tended to move towards protectionism. So what exactly is protectionism? That is, Indian economy is closed. That is, it did not allow the foreign players to come and trade with the Indian economy. So it was a protectionism policy. A strong emphasis on self-sufficiency, that we will produce whatever is required for the economy within the domestic premises, with limited role of international trade. Industrialization, which was happening under the state monitoring, which was as a result of socialism policy, and state was intervening at the micro level in all businesses, especially in the labor and the financial markets, a large public sector and business regulation. So these were the events which this was the idea behind the government during that post-independence era. And how did this manifest in the form of different policies? So we'll look at it now. So see, the manifestation of ideology can be seen in three important policies. Three important policies, and first of all, what are those policies? We will be understanding them one by one. The first one is the license Raj. License Raj or permit Raj. See, let me give you a glimpse of the era that was prevailing during the before 90s. So now today, if you want to start any business in any of the sectors, suppose you want to set up a manufacturing firm, then you had to obtain a license from the government, which was this sort of policy was done away within the 1991. And for the license, if you look at here, for instance, permissions from large number of regulatory bodies at the time of their condition at the time of their establishment, and they were quite contradictory in nature. That is, the whole idea behind the such policy was they did not want to incentivize the setting up of factories. Rather, they used to come up with the different rules that if you have got this, you need to have a certain such as certain eligibility condition, and if the person possesses this, then there would be a sudden contradictory condition of this eligibility. So the whole idea was to curb the industrial setting up. So these were so the entire policy was disincentivizing the economic activities or the setting up the new firms. So these were needed. Large number of regulatory body permissions were needed before a firm could be granted a license to produce, and the state would, apart from, even after, if you satisfy all the condition and go on to set up an industry, the state would decide what was produced, how much you will be producing, and at what price you will be selling the goods. So such was the command or the control of the state. Such was the control of the state on the entire economy. So this was a policy which was curbing or which was impeding the growth of an economy. Now let us look at the next policy, which is import substitution. Policy of import substitution. So what exactly is this policy? Policy of import substitution. Let me give you this an idea. See, at the time of independence, government decided that it will be the public sector which will be going in all the major sectors of the economy and establishing the industries, and it followed a policy of import substitution. That is, whatever imports we need, rather than importing them, we will produce within the domestic premises. So this policy was good in a way, because it led to the wide industrial base, expansion of the industrial base within the country, which was literally non-existent before the independence. So this was the policy, but the excessive protection led to the inefficiency in the economy. See, the excessive protection of these domestic industry has led to, or breeded the inefficiency, and there was no technological progress within the country. So this policy, rather than benefiting the industries, it largely hampered or damaged the consumers' interest, because Indian products were known for exorbitant price, or that is the high price. Indian products were known for high price and low quality. Such was the state that we had gotten down to. So if you look at this policy, it advocated that replacing imports with the domestic production. It is based on the premise that country should attempt to reduce its foreign dependency through the local production of industrialized products, and was intended to promote self-reliance. This was the idea that I told you. This also led to the hampered consumer interest. So this was the policy which again dented the progress of the economy. Now let us look at the next policy, which is the closed economy. See, the Indian government had followed the policy of closed economy, wherein it did not allow the foreign players to come in and set up their industries, or the trading pattern of the India with the outside world was literally non-existent, and rupee was inconvertible, and the high tariff. So if the different players, foreign players, want to sell their products within the Indian economy, then the import duty, for example, if the product price of the product is 100 rupees, then the government imposed import duty of roughly close to 200%, which is was the highest in the world, then which would take the price to 300. So the same product would have been available within the economy, domestic economy, at 150. Then people would be buying the domestic economy rather than preferring this high priced product. So these policies hampered the trade with the international players. So, and import licensing prevented foreign goods. These kind of policies prevented the foreign goods reaching the market, which so what was a consequence of this policy? There were certain domestic industries, there was no competition to them from the foreign players, so they were complacent. So they did not come up with new innovation, and this led to inefficiency. This led to inefficiency, where they started charging higher price, and the quality of the products was very low. So this has been seen, and the over involvement of the bureaucracy often led to absurd restriction. This can be seen in strict regulation of the foreign exchange, which was through Foreign Exchange Regulation Act. So these three policies were the pillar of the Indian economy before pre 1991. Now just to give you an idea of what was the export basket in India, see the export basket in 1992 to 93 and 2015 to 16. So the petroleum products were just 2.57% now, which has increased to 11.58. Agricultural products were quite high, now it has decreased. The ores and minerals, so there was export presence, but it was minimal. So do not be under the impression that there was literally no exports. A country cannot survive that way, unlike it is a North Korea. So there were certain parts of the export which were present in the economy, and these are the manufactured goods had a higher component, that is 77.5%, and other commodities. And within manufactured goods, what exactly were the products that were being exported? Leather and leather manufacturer, chemical related product, which was the bar in the red can be seen during the 1992 to 3 era. And the engineering goods had a certain percent, that is 16.14, and textiles, which have been the backbone of the Indian economy even before the colonial expansion, even before the British imperialism. Textile industry has been the backbone of the Indian economy, and the ready-made garments were the major components of the Indian exports. So this was the scenario of the BOP. Now let us look at, so how did the event unfold during the BOP crisis? The long-term repercussions of those policies, that is the license permit Raj, and the import policy of import substitution, and the closed economy, which is also known as autarky. So be mindful, it might be asked in an examination, what is an autarky? It is a closed economy. So all these policies were combined with the immediate factor like, see, a country needs a crude oil, and because India does not have crude oil, sources of crude oil within its domestic borders, it has to import. But suddenly in 1980, late 90s, we found that late 80s, that is around the year 1990s or 85, we found the crude oil reserves in the Bombay High Oil, which is, if you look at the map of India, here is the Bombay, Maharashtra. We found the offshore reserves in the form of Bombay High Oil discoveries, which led us to a complacent situation that we need not now go for the reforms, because we have got the crude oil reserve. And apart from that, the collapse of rupee ruble reserve, rupee ruble trade. See, USSR, India had a major good relation with USSR, and most of the trading happened with USSR, that is India. See, India had a largely 100, if this is the military trade, that is military trade, if we wanted to import any equipment, defense equipment, then all the military trade, more than 80% of the military trade happened with USSR, and only rest of the that is less than 20% happened with the rest of the world. Such was the import that is the relationship between the India and USSR were so good that India had relied completely on USSR for its import with regard to the military pattern, military trade. But with the dismantling, and see, this was the rupee, or the whatever trade was happening was between these two countries, was that is rupee and ruble. So there was no need of forex reserves. So as per the, there would be certain agreement that would be signed between these two countries where the rupee and ruble exchange rate would be fixed, exchange rate would be fixed, and the government would pay for these military products by converting the rupee into ruble. But with the disintegration of this USSR, India faced a huge crisis, as now in order to trade with the rest of the countries, it needed to have a good amount of forex reserve, which it did not have, because we did not have the export component stronger in India. There was no export component, stronger component, and apart from that, even the investment component, that is FDI and FII, was not present. So it led to a weak front, forex reserve on that front. And apart from that, the immediate trigger was the Gulf War. So what these all three triggers led us to a BOP crisis. So what was this Gulf War? Let me tell you. See, what exactly happened in Gulf War was the leader of the Iraq, that is Saddam Hussein, started attacking states like Kuwait, because there were vast oil reserves in the Kuwait, and Saddam Hussein wanted to acquire those oil reserves for the expansion of his own country. So this, what happened was, this event led to the increased rise in the crude oil, and Indian government, obviously, if it has to import the crude oil, and the increased price in the crude oil led to a crisis, because it did not have the enough forex reserve to pay for it, and the forex reserve which used to come from the residents who were present within this part of the world, that is West Asia, used to send remittances to India. That is, they used to send the foreign exchange remittances back to home, which could be ultimately adding up to the forex reserve. Because of the war, even this remittances stopped coming, that is, our income stopped and the expense increased. This led to the crisis. Now let us look at how did the event unfold. So see, if you look at in 1985, India started to have BOP problems due to persistent deficit between income and expenditure. And by 1990, government was so close to see the, during the Rajiv Gandhi government that was present during this 1985 to late 1990, Rajiv Gandhi government had come up with many reforms, and it had borrowed from foreign players a lot. So this large borrowing, and the crisis was such that it could default on such borrowings. If there was a default, then the sovereign credit rating of the government would fall, and this would hamper the image of the country. So this was the situation. The central bank refused to issue more credit. In 1991, the forex exchange reserve maintained to import petroleum and other important items dropped to levels that were not sufficient to last even for a fortnight. As I said, the crisis was further compounded by the rising prices of the essential goods such as the crude oil. This forced the government to look for external aid in order to ward off this crisis. So what exactly is this external aid? So the Indian government approached the World Bank and IMF, and India received $7 billion as a loan from these agencies to solve the crisis. So how did it get the loan? It kept the gold as a collateral. 67 tons of the gold was kept as a collateral, and it received this amount, that is $7 billion. And the government had two options before it. The IMF clearly told that the IMF institution which exists to resolve the short-term crisis of any country, short-term crisis of a country. So it said, see, you can either go for the reforms, and unfold the growth in the economy, or continue with this crisis, which would further lead to a reduced growth in the country. So the government opted for reforms. So if you look at the sayings of the Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the finance minister during the 1991 government. See, the reforms that took place in 1991 were headed by PV Narasimha Rao, who was the then prime minister, and Dr. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister then. He had quoted these words verbatim in the budget speech of the 1991. So what were the words? There is no time to lose. That is, neither the government nor the economy can live beyond its mean year after year. The room for maneuver to live on borrowed money or time does not exist anymore. We need to expand the scope and the area for the operation of the market forces. So this unveiled the economy, and many reforms were introduced, which we will be discussing in the upcoming session. And this is a clipet that can be seen in the Indian Express, that how they secretly the gold was imported, taken to a destination, and this $7 billion was obtained from these international agencies. So friends, that's all we have in this session. Before we close up this session, I have a homework question for you. Who was the finance minister during the 1991 economic reforms? And the options are given below. Please type your answers in the comment section so that I will know how you have understood this topic. That's all, friends, we have in this session. We'll come back for continuation of this session, that is the reforms taken by the government during that time, and what has been the effect of those reforms in the past 30 years will be coming up in the upcoming sessions. So friends, that's all from this particular session. Thank you.